This podcast is brought to you by the Nato Association of Canada and the University of Toronto's Nato Research Group. My name is Eric Anderson. I'm pleased to be speaking today with Andrew Kirsch. He's served as an intelligence officer with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, for 10 years. His memoir, I Was Never Here, My True Canadian Spy Story of Coffees, Code Names, and Covert Operations, was a national bestseller. He is currently CEO of the Kirsch Group, a security risk consulting firm based in Toronto. He's a public speaker on issues of cyber, physical, and national security. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Probably needed a shorter book title to get through the introduction, but I appreciate you having me.
No, it's a great book title. It's a lot of fun. I've read a few of your op-eds and have watched some of your videos, but for those who don't know too much about you, if you could just jump in with a little bit of your background on how you got started in this world of security.
Yeah, I didn't grow up dreaming of being a spy or working in intelligence. I was in finance. Went to school in the U.S. and I was a senior at university when the 9/11 attacks happened, and obviously that was very transformational, or very for a young person who's coming out of school. I ended up working in finance in London, England, and I was there in 2005 when the bombs went off on July 7th. And for those who remember, were old enough to have lived through that time, it was like this age of terrorism. I call it the age of terrorism. There were bombs going off. We were worried about bombs going off in capital cities. Spain had a train derailment. Troops was ramping up and going to Afghanistan, and terrorism was kind of on the front pages and the front steps all over. So I had one eye on the financial pages, another eye on current events. And I thought, maybe there's something going on in the world. And I joked that I Googled, how do I become a Canadian spy? And I probably Googled, does Canada have spies, before how do I become one? So it was not necessarily top of mind. It was just something going on. And I want to help out. I want to be involved. So I applied online to CSIS. I moved back home, and then also to join the Army Reserves and the Infantry Reserves. And I was at the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada and the Cameron Highlanders for about 7 years as well, thinking, okay, well, I'm getting in here somehow to do something.
Yeah. What resonates with me about that is this idea that you just Googled, does Canada have spies? Because I think that a lot of Canadians don't know whether we have a spy agency, or certainly what we do in terms of national security, even though security has come up a lot recently, which we'll get to. But, we know that there's the CIA. I think most Canadians would know that, which carries out missions abroad. And we know about MI5 and MI6 from romanticized James Bond films and that sort of thing. But why do you think we don't know? Why does the average Canadian not know whether we have a spy agency or sort of take matters of national security seriously?
There was a poll I saw a while back, and I think it said if you could identify Canada's intelligence service, you are less than 30% of the Canadian population. And I tell people I used to work in intelligence. They say, "Oh, we have a spy service, or we do that stuff." There's zero awareness. And I feel for the people who are like me, who were interested in their career and then start Googling and realize there's no information about it online. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book. It's not a policy book. It's not a legal book. It's not, I did this for 30 years and we're getting it wrong book. It was, if you have this crazy notion you want to run away and join the circus, this is actually what your life looks like, because we really don't have any, I'd say less than Hollywood cachet. We have minimal awareness. And that's just kind of been, I think, the tradition. There's this, we are neither seen nor heard. We don't boast about our successes. We don't draw any attention to ourselves. And there are many legit reasons why we need to protect our sources and methods. But I think it's in the public's interest to have some understanding of the threats that we face and how we can protect ourselves, and that there's an organization that is doing this important work. I tell people that whatever safety and security we enjoy in Canada is not an accident. It's not guaranteed to continue. Mm-hmm. It's because we have people who are working away to keep us safe, and we all have a role to play in that as well. So the more we know about our role and responsibility and the threats, I think the easier it'll be for the folks at CSIS to do their job.
Well, then let's talk about that role, because for the person listening at home that might not know, what are the parameters of CSIS? I think it was started in 1984, perhaps. But in terms of what agents do,
Yes.
the domestic role, can we kind of get into the weeds a little bit on the parameters?
Yeah, let me skip very far ahead and do a quick overview, which CSIS created in 1984 following an inquiry following the FLQ crisis, where the RCMP was found to overreach in their investigation. It was decided to split out the law enforcement or the intelligence function from law enforcement. So we have a domestic security service that is mandated to collect, analyze, and advise government on the threats to the security of Canada. There are 4 threats. They are espionage and sabotage, foreign influenced activities, terrorism, and subversion. And that's it. Subversion is this domestic overthrow of the government, obviously historic roots in the FLQ crisis. And we've traditionally thought a lot about terrorism, but now we're seeing this foreign influenced activities, which is a core part of CSIS's mandate, as is espionage and sabotage. So what does an intelligence officer do? Well, you think about the mandate: collect, analyze, and advise. And we collect information on threats to security of Canada, those 4 threats. We process that through analysis into intelligence, and we advise the government on what we're seeing. And it's not to bring charges. This is pure intelligence. So I held a couple roles in my career, and one of them was as a field investigator. I was literally a collector. I would go and I would knock on doors 20 minutes from where I lived and where I grew up, and I would say, "Hello, my name is Andrew. I'm here from CSIS. I believe you can help me with my national security investigation. Can I have a minute of your time?" Then after I managed to convince the person that CSIS is a real place, that I am who I say I am, that they are not in any trouble, typically they would help and give whatever they could. So when I say it's important people know about it, we're knocking on doors every single day in Canada asking Canadians for their assistance. And there's this misconception that if CSIS knocks on your door, you're in trouble. Well, it's often quite the opposite. It's because we believe that you have information and would be willing to give it to us, that you'd be willing to share it. You're kind of this social butterfly, having coffee in coffee shops and meeting with people and collecting there. And then the analyst role is overseeing these national security investigations. You are seeing if there's any gaps, information gaps, intelligence gaps. You are tasking these regional collectors, that your field investigators, to go and talk to people and see if you can fill this gap. You're liaising with foreign partners. You're seeing if the CIA has any information, if the Brits have any information. You're gathering OSINT, and we have technical intercepts. You are kind of collecting all this information, analyzing it, and then the role between our intelligence service and the government is important. CSIS advises, and government decides. We collect and advise, and then those who have the decision-making powers, they got to figure out what to do with it, if anything.
Well, there's 2 things you said there that I want to pick up on, and I'll see if I make sure I keep them both in my head. But one is that, of course, that you would share or receive information from the Americans and the Brits. So there is that intelligence sharing. But of course, just to hammer it home, CSIS was really supposed to be a domestic security service. And can you kind of delineate for people that don't know, like between the domestic and foreign, and how that works?
The CIA is obviously a foreign intelligence service. Most countries, or many countries, have a foreign and domestic. The British have the BSIS, the BSS. Australia has ASIO and ASIS, and we're part of the Five Eyes intelligence sharing community. And because we only have a domestic service, obviously that limits us a little bit on our collection, and the size, the size of our organization also limits us a bit. So when you have the Americans nearby and the British, and we have close sharing relationships, we are obviously going to lean on them for information and intelligence, because the mandate is to collect threats to the security of Canada, but not every threat to Canada originates in Canada. And so that's where these relationships are very important for kind of sentinel information. They hear things that they pick up, and they liaise with us. We can ask them questions. They will ask us questions. I think people should be proud of our intelligence service. We punch above our weight. We have a very good reputation, at least when I was there, and I assume continues, for the quality of our intelligence officers and, the information that we are able to get. The fact that many in our country are happy to work with us, that we have communities that we have close relationships with. So it is a domestic service and it's threats to the security of Canada, but that does mean that we are part of this network, and we have to pull on all threads, and we have limitations in our mandate for what we can do and what we can ask and what others can ask and do for us. But within that, even though we're not abroad, we can collect abroad. We can, as long as it relates back to our domestic threats.
Right. And that's something that I want to ask about. So from everything that I've read, it seems like there are probably agents who are abroad, but they're only sort of mandated to collect sort of incoming security information. So they're not out there necessarily trying to steal secrets of engineering or this or that or the other. It's more just what is incoming in terms of safety threats and security. Is that right?
Yes, there is some Section 16, which is we can do some collection, but that is very not core mandate. It is threats to security of Canada, and there are some people abroad who are operating that liaison capacity, mostly overtly. I don't think I'm giving away any national security secrets that the CSIS was operating in Afghanistan. We had a large military presence in Afghanistan, and supporting those Canadians, I believe, was threats to security of Canada and threats to Canadians. So we wanted to make sure that they were supported, and we were able to provide some information intelligence on that effort. So there are ways to expand it. There are approval processes to expand a bit on that mandate. Like it doesn't say only operating within Canada; it says threats to Canada. But I know there's been much discussion, and I believe we'll talk about it, which is, should we have a foreign service? Like, why just one? And are we missing out and all those? So I don't, not to prompt that is the logical next step is, well, why would we put any limitations on ourselves that we currently have?
Definitely want to come to that, but maybe let's, just so we can keep a train of thought of how things work in the domestic spheres, because you brought up about how CSIS shares information with the government. So before we get into the foreign interference thing, we've seen things over the last few years. There was a Sikh Canadian activist last year, as we know, Hardeep Najjar, who was assassinated, which is terrifying that a Canadian on Canadian soil is killed. And I've heard several things about these sort of pseudo-Chinese police stations where the CCP is effectively sort of bullying Chinese diaspora in Canada. Yep. So I guess then CSIS must be on top of this stuff. It must know something about these things as they're coming up. So how do these things become actionable? And how does CSIS work to defend Canadians? If it's there to collect information, where is it getting lost in translation that these things still happen on Canadian soil? How does that work?
Yes, that's a great question. So the idea that foreign governments, covertly, clandestinely, cannot be here in Canada manipulating, threatening our local diaspora communities who are often in Canada because they are opposed to the governments back where, home countries. Canada is unique that we have many large diaspora communities from all over the world who are here that maintain links, maintain some advocacy with their countries back home, often in opposition to the governments back home. And that means our foreign affairs and foreign politics might not align with our domestic interests. That is a difficult challenge to walk. So what CSIS does is collect this information, collect intelligence, advise the government to say, we have an issue. And one of the government clients can be law enforcement, right? We've seen with terrorism investigations, CSIS will say, well, we think that there's a problem over here, and in a very controlled way, they would say, we think you need to look closely at X, Y, and Z. The challenge we have with law enforcement, which also could take up whole podcasts and has, is the intelligence to evidence problem, which is CSIS has a lower threshold to investigate threats, right? There's this reason to suspect versus reason to believe. And you cannot use that lower threshold to collect to build an evidentiary case. It's kind of like, you're circumventing the reason that we gave you this lower threshold is because you're not going to use it for law enforcement powers. So we have this scenario where we flag a problem, send it to, if it's law enforcement, and then run a parallel investigation where CSIS wants to maintain eyes on the security threat we're facing, while law enforcement has to ramp up investigation from effectively zero to collect evidence that they can use or not and decide if they're going to pursue it or not. And there are cases where they don't get to that level. CSIS will raise an alert and they will say it doesn't quite get there. And so that's the reason you run these parallel investigations. So if that happens, and the RCMP or whoever it is says, it's more of an intelligence issue than enforcement, we can't, CSIS can, I'm no longer there, start back up from zero. They want to maintain connectivity. So that's a challenge that they have. And as I said, on the government side, there are often, I'm hard on the government. I also have some sympathy for the government. There are not always black and white cases, right? Intelligence is not evidence. Intelligence is a picture, and you are within your rights to ask questions to say, well, how do you know that? Has that been collaborated and corroborated? How firm do you feel in this assessment? And it can be gray. And there are not always these great straight line answers, which is, well, so-and-so has done this and the natural punishment is this. That's not saying that they shouldn't do more. And I'd like to see our response to national security threats be more robust. I don't hold it against foreign countries to push and pursue their interests. It is incumbent on us to occasionally say, no, that's too far. And no, you can't do that. Enough. We have to push back. And that's where this delicate balance of CSIS saying there's a problem, politicians or others, the government clients saying, I don't maybe think it's as bad as you say. I don't know what to do with it. And we can get complacent here. And so nothing happens.
And so for something like these sort of pseudo police stations that we've heard something about in Toronto, and I'm speaking my own words, hypothetically, like if CSIS raises the flag about it, it can raise it to both the RCMP and then the government. And then it's kind of up to them to say, well,
up until a few years back, CSIS had no enforcement powers. Now they have some threat reduction activities powers, which was a new addition to the toolbox, but CSIS can't really do much about it. So they would alert the police and say, look, we think there's intimidation. We think there is blackmail, coercion, whatever those are. And they can say to the government, look, we think foreign governments are operating here against Canadian interests, and whether that means they need to be marched out and kicked out or demarched or diplomatically dealt with, covertly dealt with, and say, hey, guys, we see what's going on here. This has to stop. We're not going to make an international incident out of it, but we see what you're doing and enough. Or more public, because pieces will keep investigating. Remember, the mandate, the original mandate was collect, analyze, and advise. There was nothing in there as far as charges. And quick anecdote, we would go out. Back when I was there, foreign fighters was a big issue. Okay, so you have these people online who are saying, "I want to go join ISIS." Okay, and the mandate, like, we couldn't go and say, "Cut it out, like, stop."
Yeah.
So that was the threat reduction. That was not. Now, could you go to the person and say, "Do you think this is going to cause you a problem? Do you think this is?"
Yeah.
So we would collect, I'm holding out my quote fingers, by collecting information, we could imply that this was not we could go to some kid's parents and say, did you know your son was posting this?
Right.
Do you think that's okay? And we are collecting information, but we're also strongly suggesting that maybe someone might want to get a handle on it. The reason threat reductions came in is because it got past that point where someone say, I'm flying out. And they said, well, we can't know this. We have to be able to do something quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, very limited. It's a very limited mandate for many reasons. Like, I don't want to say that it's what do they say? It's a feature, not a bug, right? Like, we're supposed to divide these things up in a way, and doesn't mean it's always going to work perfectly.
But that sort of brings us a little bit to the topic of the day in the last year or so, and stop me whenever I'm wrong about this. But just as a Canadian that reads the news, we've sort of been made aware that in the last couple elections, there has been intentional sort of meddling and campaigns of misinformation and disinformation. We sort of knew that, and that was already sort of happening. Maybe in American elections, we knew perhaps foreign actors like Russia and China were interested in sort of influencing even just discourse about democracy, and we know that there's bots online that trying to sway people and make everyone angry and sow discord in the West and that kind of thing. And we knew that the CCP had seemingly targeted an MP like Michael Chong because he had been raising the issue of what was happening with the Uyghurs in China. But all of this was a little bit different from what's been coming up in the past few weeks, which is that there's this report from NISCOP, which is the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, saying that it's no wittingly or unwittingly, which sounds really bad because it sounds just dopey. There have been members of parliament that have been colluding or inadvertently being compromised by foreign actors. Have I got that right?
I realize we're on video, and me nodding along is not doesn't make for great radio. Yeah, that's what we are. I guess there's a few things we're seeing. First of all, we're seeing, because of our interconnectivity and social media and the internet, that governments can conduct these influence operations, have other means and avenues to meddle in ways that are very hard to track. You're right. Misinformation campaigns. Voter suppression is a tool that parties use, right? You put out these flyers and you disincentivize your opposition to vote for their leader. They're never going to vote for you, but you want to make it unpalatable for someone to show up and vote for their own party, right? This idea of voter suppression. Well, this Facebook memes and chat groups where how do you find out a reason why someone didn't vote? Is it because of misinformation? Very hard to track, very hard to see where it came from. So if that is state sponsored, obviously a huge challenge. And this report talking about witting and unwitting, and witting is a huge word. That is the word that I think raised a lot of hairs on everyone's head, which was people are colluding. They know what they're doing. They're doing it intentionally. And, we can have through complacency or incompetence, folks who do bad things because they don't know any better. They don't realize the risks. They think they're being helpful to both sides. And at the end of the day, they are working against Canadian interests. But when you get to people who are allegedly operating in a witting fashion with foreign governments, foreign intelligence services against Canadian interests, it's pretty significant. It's extremely severe.
It's shocking.
Absolutely. And I wrote, I'm big on Twitter. It was amazing to me to see that in print, right? Yeah. To see that actually come out. I go back to why we're having this conversation at all, which is that someone leaked, and I am 100% against leakers. I hate it. I mean, I hate the fact that we're having this conversation because someone, presumably from CSIS, decided they were going to take it upon themselves to selectively leak information on this foreign interference in campaigns. And it's selective leaking. We don't know all the information, and they just dumped it. And now, because of that, we had the special rapporteur, we're having this public inquiry, like everything stems from that. If not, we would not know. This report came from trying to address these leaked allegations. And it is amazing that we've got to this point. It is, and I hate that. I hate that it came from leaks. I think it's helpful to know. I think it's important people understand. Doesn't seem like it's one bad apple, this report reads like, to many people, to varying degrees, are witting or unwitting accomplices or colluding against Canada's interest. And it's shocking to see it in print. I'm sure it's nothing that hasn't been reported for many, many years from CSIS up the chain, but now we all know. And we're going to have to do something about it.
And it seems like, of course, that CSIS has been waving the flag on this for a little while. And initially, the question last year, and without getting into the politics of it, just like being as factual as possible, there's the issue of when did the Privy Council, the Prime Minister's office know? Did they do anything about it? And we get back to that actionable question again. Is that right?
This is the question, okay? Because it's part of CSIS's core mandate since it was founded in 1984 to investigate foreign influence activities. CSIS has been doing this since the beginning of its time, is collecting, analyzing, and advising the government on this threat. We've seen a lot of the fruits of that collection. right? There was this idea early on. It was like, does CSIS know what's going on, and do they need more tools? And I think we've seen that CSIS has a pretty good handle on what's going on, and maybe where the challenge is that the government is not listening. There was this whole thing about not reading reports, that reports aren't getting through in emails. So is the government not listening, and are they not acting appropriately? And in my mind, that was always the task of the public inquiry, which was, we had allegations that the current government benefited from foreign interference in 2 elections and didn't do much about it, which is a pretty damning allegation. Mm-hmm. And they have exclusive access to that intelligence because they are the government. Mm-hmm. And to restore confidence in our democracy required someone to say, well, there were no easy answers. They did some things. They didn't know, like some sort of rationale on whether their inaction or whether their actions were appropriate based on what they knew. Because from the outside looking in, it doesn't look good right. on what happened. And going forward now, and we're seeing this now, okay, we have this report that's pretty damning. And let me also say here, all parties, all levels of government, elected officials, appointed officials are vulnerable, susceptible to foreign interference. Our adversaries are, I wouldn't say party agnostic. They like parties in positions of power, but they
whatever suits them.
Low hanging fruit, whoever they can get in, they don't care. I'm sure there are nominations where people on all sides, whoever won it didn't matter to them. So it's in all of our interest to clean this up. And we have this damning report that says we believe this stuff is happening. And I'm not we got to leak the names and everyone's treasonous and string them up. But this idea that parties will take care of it themselves, they just haven't to this point, right? Yeah. The current government's had this information at least since March. They've been briefed on this for years. And we still haven't answered that question on whether it's appropriate or not. So for them to say, trust us, we'll deal with it, I think we need more than that. So greater transparency will help with accountability. I think we are there where we need some additional accountability, not just for the people who are possibly foreign agents or sources or whatever words we're going to use for the people who are witting accomplices, but for our government who had the information and maybe didn't do enough with it.
Can you help me unpack one thing that's come up in the last few days? The Conservatives have called for sort of release the names of these people that might be compromised. And then I think it was Dominic LeBlanc said, I can't just tell you all the names because the investigations aren't finished yet. And there's also these privacy acts and there's certain rules surrounding just giving out names. And I don't know, as a regular Canadian, I don't know the validity of that. I don't know. What he says is quite a plausible defense, but I don't know the rules.
Well, CSIS has to protect sources and methods. Right. Yeah. So number one is that is a core responsibility of CSIS, which is we can't tell you necessarily how we got this, where we got it, because that would jeopardize future investigations. And I think individuals who are accused, whatever venue they are afforded to defend themselves, should have a right in some way to defend themselves or to answer for them. And just to dispel this myth, CSIS doesn't have a list, as far as I know, of here's your 5 guys, treason. Right. Here's your 5 guys on winning. Here's your, this, and with a label and a direct line, and here's the proof. It has intelligence on activities of people that would be threats to the security of Canada. And they provide all that intelligence to this group. And the report says, we believe, some of these have risen to significant levels. So I think the individuals need, let's go ask these guys, whoever it is, let's go ask them some questions. What's going on? Were you trained in this appropriately? They might throw the old George Costanza line, was that wrong? They're not supposed to do that? Yeah. Which, hey, fair. If you say, you met with this guy, you didn't tell anybody. Well, I'm a politician. I'm supposed to meet with constituents.
I shake hands.
Every time a politician is getting yelled at for taking a photo with a problematic person, I say, they're not vetting on the spot of who this person in a t-shirt is. Let's be realistic of what we expect our people, and let's judge them on how we view that. Because, not to pick on an individual, but once we saw Han Dong start answering some questions, it did not instill a lot of confidence in his answers about what he was doing and what he knew and what he didn't know, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's okay to start asking some questions. And then the venue for that, I've heard people debate parliamentary privilege. You can get up and say, well, they're not just going to read a list,
Yeah.
Which is one. Number two, like it is more about they provided this report that says some members of parliament are doing things that may be inappropriate, and we're not going to tell you about it, and we're going to ask you to vote on them in a year. I don't know how that's tenable. And parties throw people out for much less, right? Just I'm sensitive to time here, but there is a threshold below jail and RCMP investigations where I think it's fair to say, your conduct, we expect more from members of parliament, right? And we expect, if you are pleading ignorance, well, maybe ignorance isn't a great excuse if you want to run for this party in the next election, because you should have known better. And therefore, that does not make you a great parliamentarian. Parties can hold them accountable to a lower standard, and the public can hold them accountable to it. It's not just, I'm not a criminal, therefore I can be your MP,
So some of what you said is kind of what LeBlanc said, I think, that like you can't just name a very concise list of people. These are like the witting, these are the unwitting, etc. At the same time, an average Canadian like me, we've been given this information that there's some people that are compromised. If we're supposed to punish people at the ballot box, we would want to at least know names. And then there's this kind of obtuse thing that the parties are doing, whereas Jagmeet Singh has come out and said, if there's someone in his caucus that has been found to have been colluding with foreign powers, they'll kick him out of the caucus. And that seems like the natural thing to do. Whereas Chrystia Freeland, the deputy prime minister, and it's the Liberal Party, the governing party that's been kind of nonchalant about some of this in the last year, has said, we take this very seriously, but we're not committing necessarily to kicking people out of caucus.
There needs to be some trust restored. If the government says, look, we read the information, we read the report, we read the intelligence, and we disagree, and here's why, and we don't think that this requires whatever requires, hey, that's a fair response, right? At least it's on the record. At least there's an acknowledgement. At least these are the steps we took. We had an independent person of some credentials and provided some advice. And people may agree with it and they may not. But I think this waving away, you don't deserve to know, trust us, we'll do something with it. I think we're past that point where they can all say, trust us, especially when, as I said, people have been kicked out for less. We seem to be protecting people who may or may not have done more serious things, providing them a greater level of, I don't want to say protection, but like people get kicked out of every election campaign that happens. Each party has this opposition research group, and they go around, they try and find the candidates' quotes or Facebook posts from 20 years ago. You say, see, this person has bad judgment. You see, this person is whatever. You see, this person did this, to embarrass the person, to embarrass the party and run them out of political office. And we play along with that game every election for nominal, minimal stuff. Mm-hmm. And now we're saying, hey, we have some people who might be wittingly collaborating with foreign governments against Canadian interests. Like, well, we don't think you need to know that, or we don't trust you to deal with that. I think we need greater transparency and accountability to restore some of that trust that's eroded. And it's eroded because we only know about this because of leaks. No one came forward. This was not because the government said, hey, we got a secret to tell you guys. We think you're ready to handle it. They were dragged kicking and screaming into this, which doesn't give great confidence that they will resolve it on their own.
So what they have said they will do is they're going to push this new bill, which is this Countering Foreign Interference Act, which the Conservative Party has said that they'll also support, so that hopefully it moves through quickly before presumably the next election within the next 18 months tops. I've read there's some civil liberty groups like maybe Amnesty International and etc. that have said, this is going through a little bit haphazardly and it might be a little bit of overreach and maybe it gives CSIS too many powers. But again, as an average Canadian who just reads the CBC and Global and CTV and all that kind of thing, do you know what they're afraid of in terms of those expansion of powers, or what sort of powers would be beefed up for CSIS in particular?
Yeah, maybe I'm less sympathetic to some of the arguments because I think we've so missed the mark that we need to correct. And I hope we don't overcorrect. And I'm not advocating for advocating that someone can be removed from a political party is not saying they need to be tried and publicly shamed. We have grades to these things, but clearly we have not found the right balance. So there's always this balance, right, between our risk tolerance and people's expectations of privacy, and we are finding where that balance is. Constantly it changes. I was part of this post 9/11 wave. And let me tell you something, people were sharing all sorts of information and it was like, we can't miss something else. Like when in doubt, share. There was this fear. And so the risk tolerance for what we were doing, I don't think we're doing anything illegal. I'm just saying operationally, there was a greater tolerance for risk because of the very real threat. We were missing things and the threat was out there. And then you get further away from the incident and the risk tolerance goes down and we start considering, okay, well, what are some guardrails we need to put in place? And we will kind of low. I always think of it in terms of risk and our risk tolerance, right? What are people willing to do, accept, so on, so on. And we're constantly playing with this balance. I don't know if we ever get it, like what the right answer is, but clearly we have, clearly in my opinion, we've allowed too much operating in privacy discreetly, that this has kind of flourished beyond a level that I think many are comfortable with now, knowing what it is. So we need this. There's this foreign agent registry. Is that something that's reasonable to put in place? Is it reasonable to say if you receive funding from foreign governments that you have to disclose that so we know that you are no longer able to covertly lobby? And I've heard the argument: who's going to declare it? Well, who would ever declare it? And my response is, well, if they don't, then there's a charge you can charge them with. Some of these things are because we lack a legal framework to actually enforce some of the things that we think are wrong but aren't enforceable. I heard former CSIS director Richard Fadden saying there's no foreign interference law. There's treason, and then we get down to so maybe we need some foreign interference laws of some kind. And I guess civil libertarians will push back, and kind of hawks will push ahead, and we'll find hopefully something that works and a framework that works. Obviously, for this evolving threat, right? How are you, this gray misinformation, gray witting, unwitting? Did they know? Should they have reasonably known? Did they receive training? Were they warned? Did they still do it? We kind of build a whole framework around this. And I think we need to start right now.
Moving past the MPs, you talked about sort of that information sharing. And I guess maybe that can segue us a little bit into this question of whether Canada needs a foreign intelligence service and how we would sort of beef things up, if we would just expand CSIS to have a foreign intelligence service, or whether we need one at all. Or, I mean, the one thing about sharing that comes up is that, we're in the Five Eyes. We're in NATO. Ahead of this interview, I just sort of Googled CSIS NATO because they're not the same thing and they don't, they're not connected. And one thing that came up quite interestingly was a report in 2016 that CSIS put out that it acquired this information that Russia was gearing up for war.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they did invade. And at the time, CSIS suggested, as you said, it advised, it collected, and it said, you might want to get more troops for NATO.
Over there. Yeah. That's the job, the sentinel intelligence. So there's big disagreement in the intelligence community. I am probably in the minority. I'm not a fan, or I'm not pushing for a foreign intelligence service, but I think we go back to front sometimes. I think about in terms of supply and demand, right? What are we missing? Where's the demand for foreign intelligence? What are the gaps that we think of information that we don't have that only a foreign intelligence service can fill, right? So are we going to be spying on foreign states that we are in trade negotiations with in order to get a leg up on a trade negotiation or whatnot? Are we going to try to gather intelligence on foreign companies in order to assist our domestic companies with whatever those kind of foreign government spying activities that we want to empower some new organization to do? Do we really have the stomach for it? That's something we are prepared to go and do and sometimes be caught doing and fund. Operating abroad when your mandate is threats to the security of Canada is very defensible, right? Hey, we're abroad, we're collecting some information. Occasionally things get sucked up that aren't specific to that, but this is our mandate and everyone can appreciate it. Well, foreign intelligence is a little different. There's a legal framework that it involves. And I worry that if we don't have foreign priorities firmly established that we can all agree to, then we're going to get in a real muddy and weird place. And I think we're being led by this idea of wanting a foreign service to be one of the, be a player. We have capable people, that we have the capacity, or that we can prove that we can do it without really sitting down and thinking about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to collect.
Then I guess that's the question about that stopgap in information of what are we not getting, because we're seen as perhaps, a taker of information from the Five Eyes and a country that's not pulling quite its weight with NATO because we're only up to a certain amount of our GDP spent on, would having a foreign intelligence service, for example, be seen as an act of goodwill on behalf of Canada to sort of help out others, or be sort of a giver of information as opposed to a taker?
I think by our relative size, we will always be dwarfed and a junior partner in this Five Eyes community. That said, I think we're a respected member and we can be proud of our intelligence service, not just, and let's be broader than CSIS and CSE. Our signals intelligence group is doing great work. So maybe it's an important point of clarification. We don't have a foreign human intelligence service. We do have a foreign signals intelligence service that does fantastic work. And you talk about being less well known than CSIS, CSE, and the good folks over there do fantastic work, are very well regarded in the community, and no one has any idea who they are and what they do. And they probably appreciate that very much so. So that's the question. Okay, do we want to ramp up our foreign human intelligence service? Do we want to be a bigger player on the cyber and signal side? Do we want to have a military presence, a more robust military presence than we have now? We see this marker of 2% that has been laid down, that we have agreed to, that we have never met, or certainly not in the immediate past, and don't seem to have much of a path to get there. But there are a lot of ways to prove that you are serious, to be a respected member of the global community. And I don't know if a foreign intelligence service needs to be that marker. Now I will say again, I am in the minority, probably in the minority here in the intelligence community. Many of my ex-colleagues would say we should be a real player. We should, we have matured to the point where we can contribute abroad, that we have the capabilities, capacity to do it. We should actually have well-trained, mandated, specific intelligence service doing this work. I've heard that argument. I respect that argument. I just, on the margins, disagree with it, because, as I said, we are wandering around a little bit. We have people who are abroad. We have GAC and we have us, and we, are out there. The military is human. CSE is signals intelligence. It's not that we, everyone goes abroad and don't puts their thumb in their ears or fingers in their ears and says, don't talk to me. As I said, I worry that those folks want to be supply led rather than demand led.
Could for those who don't understand, and we'll pretend I do understand, but could you explain the signals thing? What that means for like CSE and what it does in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the U.S. and the NSA, and they have a kind of electronic surveillance of signals intelligence, and I'm not an expert in CSE's mandate, but certainly they are mandated to protect our network and protect us cybersecurity wise, and they have some offensive capabilities that they are able to do to go and disrupt things abroad.
But signals itself, for those who don't know, so are we talking just sort of like almost a tripwire of certain things
on the cyber side, right? It's monitoring networks, telecommunications. It's that electronic, we call it technical surveillance. Well, the CSC has a mandate to do that, technically surveil abroad. And that's kind of what they're out there doing. And also to protect our network from folks who are doing it to us, who are trying to penetrate our network and services and core government services that are accessible via the internet and run online. So there's kind of this electronic spy versus spy that are doing that are battling each other in cyberspace all over the world. And we are a keen player in that world. Absolutely.
So where do you see security going and sort of intelligence going in terms of the new threat of the AI, but in terms of cybersecurity as well?
Yeah, AI, it's like everyone's trying to build a better mousetrap, right? People are using it offensive, and people are using it for defensive, and the guys it's changed, they go for offensive. So I think everyone trying to incorporate that into their operations, we're going to see more and more of that. It just makes sense to be smarter, to be more effective and efficient. And where I see cyber, I say the threat landscape has changed. Effectively, we used to do these things. It was called close access or remote access, right? Where you would have to go, if you wanted to plant a technical bug or whatnot, you'd have to go physically in the space and drill into a wall and plant a microphone and then run some wires or connect it to power and then go and record it. Well, our interconnectivity now means that we are accessible. Our cameras, our microphones, our tracking devices, our phones that we carry around at all times. So we're going to see more and more of the threats have not changed, right? The CSIS threats are espionage, sabotage, foreign influence activities, terrorism, and subversion. But the threat surface, how these are being carried out, has changed from this close access to remote. Cyber threats. We were worried about bombs going off when I signed up in 2005, and now we're worried about water treatment plant salt levels being changed in Florida. And espionage and sabotage was envelopes of cash, bribing politicians or getting access, breaking into places. And now we're seeing this state-sponsored misinformation campaigns on Facebook, right, for foreign interference. So the same threats being carried out remotely, which makes them very, very hard to track, very hard to attribute, very hard to defend against. And if I can bring it back, I'd say this is why this awareness piece is so important, because we are all on the front lines here. We cannot just leave it to the government. We are all vulnerable. We're all a part of this threat surface, right? I am, through my phone and my credentials, an access point to everyone I'm connected to on social media and LinkedIn and whatnot. And every company is as strong as their weakest link, and everyone is vulnerable to phishing and whatnot. So we have to empower everybody to understand the threats and the risks that we face, give them some tools to mitigate it so they have some situational awareness and don't get complacent, and then can be advocates, and the rising tide can raise all of us up to enhance our security for our companies, our communities, and our country. So let's start talking about this stuff.
I'm mindful of time, so this is sort of my last question. I think that segues well into it. It's a quick one, but kind of a two-parter. A, what keeps you up at night in terms of security threats? And B, if you had unlimited resources, what's the first place you'd put resources into in terms of security?
Well, me personally, in terms of my family and my phone and my stuff, being a victim of identity theft, fraud, through no fault of my own, or bad things happen. I just it's, anybody who's ever gone through it, it's the worst.
The air duct cleaners.
Yeah. Just, your credentials get out there, and all of a sudden someone's opened a bank account in your name, and horrific. On the national, and I know you were probably asking more national security, but we're just kind of muddling along. And how bad does it get? Like, at what point does someone say, "Hey, enough of this"? We're a grown-up country. We're a real country here.
Yeah.
And I'm desperate for anybody to kind of grab the reins of this thing and say, we're going to stand up for ourselves. We're going to protect our citizens. We're not going to, put up with foreign countries meddling in our campaigns, assassinating Canadians on Canadian soil.
Yeah.
That someone felt they could do that, and that Canada would not find out or not do anything back or whatever that is. And I get we're a small country and trade and we have to be strategic with what we can do and what we're going to do. I get all that. But at some point, there's got to be some pushback. There's got to be some sort of moment where we say, look, this has gone too far and we all need to rally together, because we can rally together on it. Right? It affects all of us. It doesn't have to be partisan. So what keeps me up at night? Yeah, we're getting very complacent, and Today, it's foreign interference that we're learning more about. We haven't heard a lot about terrorism in a little while, and I hope people have their eye on the ball there too. I'm sure my colleagues do. But we're getting too complacent in this country. And that we have that luxury as citizens is kind of a nice thing, that someone's taking care of us. We don't have to worry about it every day. That's great. I wouldn't want everyone to walk into work every day wondering, head in a swivel. But we can do that if the people in positions of responsibility are looking out for us and are willing to take action to protect us. And I'm worried they're complacent too.
Yeah.
I don't remember the last. What keeps me up at night? And then what was the last?
What's the first place you'd put money or resources within security?
Well, there, a colleague of mine, I cannot take this the credit for this point. But a colleague and friend of mine said, look, if we can make cyber count towards our NATO spending commitments, how wonderful would that be? If we could become a leader in cybersecurity, if we can become just pour resources into this threat that we are all facing to protect our companies, to protect our leaders, to defend ourselves. I think that the challenge is so great, and also it's so technical that everyday people can't do it alone. We need some leadership on that file. We need CSE to look after our networks. We need shared services. We need more cyber analysts. We need more people with cyber abilities. We need more tools and an infrastructure that supports it with greater AI and gadgets that are on the cybersecurity front. So that's where I'd look at pouring more money and energy into, because the cost benefit analysis of hacking someone from your desk at lunch from Romania or whatever, it's happening so often and it's going to continue to happen. That threat is not going away. So I would see if we could commit some real resources and energy to raising awareness of the threat and then helping us defend against it.
I think that's a great place to leave things for today. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew. You've been more than generous, and I know you've got things to do, and this was a great conversation, and I appreciate it very much.
Well, anytime. I'm always happy to. I can tell I'm passionate about it. I care about it. I wrote a book because I think it's important more people know about it, and always happy to connect to chat, and also like my consulting practice, I try to help people.
Great. Thank you so much. I know you got things to do. Talk again soon. No problem.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.